Jamestown, Virginia, 1609. 500 English settlers had just arrived in the New World. They carried dreams of gold, of land, of freedom. 6 months later, only 60 were still alive. Not because of disease, not because of Native American attacks, but because of something American history had buried for over 400 years. In 2012, archaeologists from the Smithsonian Institution excavated a skull. It belonged to a 14-year-old girl, and what forensic science discovered on those broken bones completely changed the way Americans understand the founding story of their own nation. Now, before I continue, what do you think actually happened in Jamestown during that winter? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I personally read and reply to every single one. To understand what happened, we need to go back to the fall of 1609. The Virginia Company of London had a problem. They had sold shares to wealthy English investors. They had promised gold, profit, and a thriving new colony. What they had instead was a swamp. Jamestown was built on marshy land along the James River. The water was brackish and contaminated. The soil was poor and difficult to farm. The local Powhatan Confederacy had cut off all food trade with the settlers. And then winter came. A brutal, unforgiving winter that historians now call the starving time. Between the fall of 1609 and the spring of 1610, the population of Jamestown collapsed. 500 colonists entered that winter. 60 stumbled out alive the following spring. That is a mortality rate of 88% in less than 6 months. For 400 years, the official explanation was simple: starvation, disease, harsh conditions, end of story. But there was one detail that never quite fit: the bones. Scattered across the site were human remains mixed in with animal carcasses, horse bones, dog bones, and human bones, all in the same trash pit. Nobody wanted to ask why. Here is what you were never taught in American history class. The Virginia Company was not a government. It was a corporation, a for-profit enterprise funded by private investors back in London. And like any corporation facing catastrophic losses, it had one priority: protect the brand. Letters sent back to England were carefully filtered. Reports of cannibalism were suppressed or dismissed as rumors. One eyewitness account, written by a survivor named George Percy, described the horror directly. Percy wrote that desperate colonists had dug up corpses and consumed them to survive. His account was buried for centuries. Not lost, buried, because the Virginia Company needed more ships, more settlers, and more investment money. A colony where survivors were eating each other was not exactly a strong sales pitch, so the official story became one of noble suffering and natural hardship. The human cost was scrubbed from the record, and for 400 years, that sanitized version became the founding myth of American colonial history, until one woman decided to dig. Her name was Dr. William Kelso. He was the lead archaeologist at historic Jamestown, a joint project between the National Park Service and Preservation Virginia. For years, Kelso and his team had been systematically excavating the original fort site. In 2012, they unearthed something extraordinary inside a trash pit from the starving time period: fragmented bones, small, delicate, human. The bones were sent to the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History. There, forensic anthropologist Dr. Douglas Owsley took over. Owsley is one of the most respected skeletal analysts in the United States. He has worked on cases ranging from Civil War soldiers to victims of mass disasters. But what he found on this particular set of bones stopped him cold. The remains belonged to a young female, estimated age between 14 and 17 years old. She had no name in any historical record, so the scientific team gave her one. They called her Jane of Jamestown, and every single cut mark on her bones told a story that no official document had ever dared to put into words. This is where the science becomes impossible to ignore. Dr. Owsley and his team performed a complete forensic analysis of Jane's remains. They used high-resolution CT scanning, three-dimensional facial reconstruction, and forensic taphonomy. That last term means the study of what happens to a body after death, and what they found was systematic, clinical, deliberate. Jane's skull showed 4 clear chop marks to the forehead. These were not random. The pattern indicated someone had attempted to open the cranium, to access the brain. The jaw showed precise knife cuts along the lower edge. These cuts matched exactly what forensic scientists call defleshing marks. Someone had methodically removed the soft tissue from her face. The tibia, the large bone of the lower leg, showed similar markings, scraping patterns consistent with the removal of muscle and marrow. Here is what makes this evidence scientifically bulletproof. The cut marks on Jane's bones were compared against two reference databases. First, against documented cases of survival cannibalism from other historical sites around the world. Second, against Native American butchering practices from the same geographical region and time period. The marks on Jane's bones matched the first database precisely. They did not match the second at all. This single finding demolished any alternative explanation. Jane was not a victim of a ritual. She was not killed in battle. She was not a sacrifice. She was a young girl who died during the starving time, and her body was processed for food by people who were desperate enough to do it. The isotope analysis of her bones revealed one more critical detail. Strontium and oxygen isotopes in human bone record where a person grew up. Jane's isotope signature matched the British Isles. She was English. Now here is where the story gets even darker, because Jane was not alone. After the initial publication, continued excavation at the same trash pit layer revealed additional fragmented human remains. More bones showing similar cut marks, similar defleshing patterns, similar evidence of marrow extraction. Jane was not an isolated incident. She was evidence of a pattern. But the second bombshell is the one that truly rewrites history. Ask yourself this question. If 500 people entered the starving time and 88% of them died, where did that many bodies go? The archaeological record does not show mass burials consistent with that number. Researchers from historic Jamestown have now proposed something that mainstream history has been extremely reluctant to accept. The consumption of the dead during the starving time was not random. It was not the act of a single desperate individual on a single desperate night. The evidence suggests it was a sustained, repeated survival strategy across multiple months. A 2017 study published in the International Journal of Osteoarchaeology identified additional human bone fragments from the same Jamestown deposit. At least 4 individuals beyond Jane showed processing marks. 4 confirmed cases from a single trash deposit. From a single winter. One single winter. In a colony that the Virginia Company was simultaneously describing in its London pamphlets as a land of promise and plenty. The gap between the official story and the physical evidence is not a gap. It is a chasm, and it raises a question that forensic science alone cannot answer. Who was responsible? Who was truly responsible? This is the part that most history channels skip. They show you the bones and stop there. But the real question is not what happened inside those walls. The real question is, who put those people in that position in the first place? The Virginia Company of London recruited these colonists with brochures, actual printed promotional material describing Virginia as a paradise of abundance. They sent settlers with inadequate food supplies, inadequate tools, and zero realistic preparation for the environment they were entering. They prioritized profit timelines over human survival. And when things collapsed catastrophically, they suppressed the evidence and kept sending more people. Here is my read on this. The starving time was not purely a natural disaster. It was a management failure dressed up as an act of God. A corporation made a series of knowable, preventable decisions. History is not always what was written down. Sometimes it is what was left in the ground. Jane of Jamestown was a 14-year-old girl who crossed an ocean looking for a new life. She became instead the most important forensic witness in American colonial history. The Smithsonian did not find a monster in that trash pit. They found evidence of human beings pushed past every conceivable limit by a system that valued profit over their survival. Bones do not lie. They do not have political agendas. They do not need investors. If you want the truth about history, sometimes you have to dig beneath the official story. The real America is buried right under our feet. Please like and subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories.